All right, good afternoon and welcome to the first Kansas Soil Health Partnership Forum of 2025. My name is Jennifer Simmelink. I'm the Executive Director of the forum's host, the Kansas Soil Health Alliance. We are excited to host the Kansas Soil Health Partnership Forum and thank you for joining us today. This forum was established in 2020 by the Kansas NRCS office. In the fall of 2024, a steering committee with members representing NRCS, Kansas State Research and Extension, the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Conservation, Kansas Sorghum, Kansas Biological Survey, and Kansas Farmers was formed to evaluate and refresh the Kansas Soil Health Partnership Forum. The two biggest changes the steering committee recommended were establishing the Kansas Soil Health Alliance as the forum's host and moving the forum from its previous invite-only format to an open webinar to encourage and welcome participation from anyone who has an interest in moving soil health forward in Kansas. So we're excited for the new faces who are joining us today. For those who are unable to join the monthly forums due to scheduling conflicts, each forum will be recorded and housed on the Kansas Soil Health Alliance's YouTube page. Links to the forum will also be provided on the Kansas Soil Health Alliance's social media pages and newsletter. Throughout the year, the Kansas Soil Health Partnership Forum will feature speakers with the knowledge on a wide range of soil health topics. Speakers will be from academia, industry, non-government organizations, state agencies, and of course, Kansas farmers who are the boots on the ground implementing the soil health principles on the land they manage. To start off today's forum, I'm going to put a quick 2-question survey up for everyone to complete. This will just help us understand who's the dynamic of today's audience, and we'll appreciate your quick replies. See if I can get it to pop up here. All right, hopefully it's up. This is our first time running through this. If you're able to answer, that will be perfect. Great. So thanks for providing that. Are you able to see those answers, Gretchen?
No.
Nope. Okay.
No.
All right. So it looks like we are about 20% farmers, 40% educator or researcher, 33% agency employee, and then 17% other. And everyone in our audience today is from Kansas. So now I can share results. All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna Johnson. She's the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Kansas Soil Health Alliance. She will introduce today's presenter.
Okay, thank you. So today's speaker is Dr. Gretchen Sassenrath. She is a professor of agronomy at Kansas State University at the Southeast Research and Extension Center in Parsons, Kansas. She's originally from Missouri, but her education and experience have taken her to several states, including Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, California, and Mississippi. Most recently, she has established a research program on conservation production systems that improve agronomic productivity, enhance soil and water resources, and increase economic return for producers. Today, Dr. Sassenrath will be presenting on a historical look at Kansas soils, as well as what we might anticipate for the future.
Thank you very much. And thank you I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully I'll get click the right button to share the right screen. Okay, good. Looks like you're seeing it. First of all, I'd like to really thank you for putting this program together and inviting me or pushing me to prepare the presentation. I had a lot of fun doing this. I really enjoy playing with numbers and also seeing what's going on. Another point I'd like to say is if anyone has a question, I don't know if you can unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in the chat or the Q&A. I don't mind being interrupted with questions. So if you have a question, something comes up, just go ahead and interrupt me and ask it, and we can talk about it then. I cannot see the participants, so I won't see if you have a hand raised. So just go ahead and send the question in, okay? In putting this presentation together, like I said, I had a lot of fun with it. And I actually had both of my sons help me. Aaron, the older boy, helped with some of the statistical analysis, and my younger son helped with the historical components of it. So I want to recognize their contribution to this. So in looking at this, I sort of separated the history of Kansas soil into 4 components and then a look forward. So we've got the settlement period, growth and transition, transformation, and then the current state. As I'm sure everybody here knows, but I'm just going to go ahead and give an overall background. Kansas has a glaciated region up in the northeast, very highly productive soils. Then we have the Osage Suestis, and I'm going to talk a lot about that because I'm located in Parsons. This is my neck of the woods, if you will. So this is what I'm most familiar with. The Flint Hills, the Smoky Hills, and then we get into the high plains with some different regions around those areas. There are very large differences in soil and environment, so it really changes a lot. If we look at the first period, the settlement period, 1840s, a little bit before that to 1900, really not surprisingly, not that long ago, found this quote: "The first American explorers who passed through the territory reported that the region was totally unfit for human habitation." And that's from Brainard. I think that's very amusing. So looking at the timeline of things, we had the 1803, the Kansas region was acquired into the United States from the Louisiana Purchase. The first settlers really came into Doniphan County in that northeast corner. 1820, the Census of Agriculture began. So that's when they began taking recordings of how much was being produced in different areas. In 1827, Daniel Boone was sent to teach agriculture to the native populations of Kansas. And then in 1854, the Kansas Territory was established. In the 1850s, the Osage people were removed from Kansas. And again, the reason I'm pointing this out is that it was primarily from the southern part that the removal occurred. And so that timeline changes when Kansas agriculture became common in that area. 1861, Kansas was admitted as a state, gained their statehood. In 1865, after the end of the Civil War, homesteads were offered to Union veterans, and about 100,000 people accepted it. So it was a big change after the Civil War, how Kansas was changed in agriculture. So here we've got a historical map. And again, the region, my stomping grounds is down here in Parsons. This area was Osage Reservation for a long time. That was then, they were then pushed out and pushed into Indian territory, if you will. But so this was some of the latter parts of Kansas that were settled. Again, most of the initial settlement was up in Doniphan County. So the settlement period, 1840s to 1900, and again, the census began in the 1820s, but there really wasn't a lot going on in Kansas until the 1865 or so. And you can see a huge increase in corn grain production. A lot of that just had to do with breaking out the prairie. So the first initial thing that happened is just breaking out the prairie. Oxen teams were used to break the soil and plow it. And that happened extensively as Kansas was settled in the 1800s. Again, looking at the map, the Doniphan region up here is the glaciated region, has mixed forest and tallgrass prairie. About the third of the eastern third of Kansas is tallgrass prairie, moving to mixed grass, and then shortgrass prairie. the thing that's phenomenal about a prairie is the ecosystem. And I think we're just now really beginning to look and realize what a phenomenal gift we had in the prairie. And this is a prairie plant with an incredible root system. And that root system is what made our soils and really gave us the richness that we have. So this is measured in feet, and you can see from the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, some vegetation goes down to 12 feet into the soil. An incredibly complex, dense, supportive environment going on in these soils. And this is the task that the settlers had to do to break out that prairie, break through those root systems, and get established. Kind of not surprisingly, we see a fairly substantial loss in productivity from the beginning to the end. Part of this is probably due to starting in Doniphan County in the glaciated region that was very productive and breaking out new ground that was not as productive. But overall yields declined fairly regularly, about a third of a bushel per acre per year loss in yield, down to by the 1900s, we're seeing about 20 bushel an acre yield, quite low. I found a very interesting manuscript, Bacteria of the Soil by Mayo and Kinsley, published in 1903. They say the agriculturalists of the eastern states expend large sums annually for fertilizers to maintain the fertility of the soil. The soils of the western states do not require the application of artificial fertilizers, but the soils of the eastern states were formerly as productive as that of the middle and west, but constant cropping led to an exhaustion of the fertilizer. And he warns the fertility of the soil of the middle states and the west is being rapidly diminished. And if means are not taken to prevent it, the time is not far distant when it will be necessary to apply artificial fertilizers to the soil as it is now in the East. He did a whole lot of measurements on bacterial counts and so on in the soil, but it was recognized as early as 1903 the problem that the soil microbe had in constant cropping systems. So now we move to the growth and transition stage, which I'm saying from 1900 to 1945, right after the Second World War. We see a pretty substantial drop off in corn acres. A lot of that is due to the transition away from horsepower towards tractor power. So we see the decline in horses and equine pretty much mimics the decline in corn grown, number of acres grown. We see a continued decline in yield, not quite as rapidly. This is about 0.2 bushels per acre per year loss in activity in yield, and over that time period. And here is the yellow is the Dust Bowl years when we had an extreme growth problems. Now we go from the transformative to the transformative period from 1945 to 1990. And this is right after World War II, huge advances in all kinds of things, fairly level corn production. Again, we've moved away from horses as power sources, so it's just not as needed. But we have an absolutely phenomenal increase over this time frame in yield per acre. The yields just unprecedented increase. A lot of that is because of new chemistry, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, all of those things. We also have what's called the green revolution, where there's a lot of genetic engineering, really improving the genetic base of what the farmers were able to grow. A lot of new cultivars coming out. So we had just a phenomenal increase, almost 3 bushel per acre per year increase in yield during that transformation period. And then we get to the modern era. And again, we see a big shift starting in the 1990s. with a big increase in the corn acres grown. This is because of the shift to biofuels. And so it made a new market for corn, and so more corn acres were grown. The thing that's a bit shocking about that, though, is we've seen a yield, it's not even a plateau, it's a yield decrease. And if you start from 1990, huge increase in acreage, but decrease in yield. And that decrease in yield repeats what was going on very early times, about a 1/4 bushel per acre per year loss of yield during the modern time. And that pattern is repeated in pretty much all the crops we've grown. So this is wheat. Kansas is the wheat state. Didn't used to be, but the acreage grown increases and decreases. The crop production decreases, very large rise, and now it's leveling off, if not decreasing. This is wheat. This is sorghum, the same kind of problem going on here. Soybean has much more great variability in the yield increase, but the soybean is the one exception, is we have increasingly numbers of acres of soybean being grown. So that expansion is still continuing. But this overall pattern is very similar. We've got a huge period of time of huge increase, and now we're seeing a decrease. So what's going on with this trend? Another thing to notice, the range in variability or variance in this time frame, the early settlement period to about 1940, the range is about 74 bushels per acre. This range during the transition period is much, much tighter. But the transition period, or the range, the variability of yields that we're seeing now, is more than double what we saw during this period here. So something else is going on as well that's leading to much higher variability in yields and declining trends in yield. So why are we losing productivity? Well, I think we all know. Tree put out this very interesting discussion of resilience and the factors to consider with a healthy agroecosystem. Stability, robustness, vulnerability, and resilience. Stability is, as he says, the ability to stand firm. No matter what happens, we're going to keep chugging along. So we have a very unstable system here with the high swings, and a more stable system here with lower swings. The ecological stability will give constancy. In other words, if we have high temperatures or drought, we're still going to get a yield. And that indicates the stability of the system. The robustness is the ability of the system to recuperate or get back to a stable condition after a perturbation. So after a drought or high temperatures, can the system recover and come back? So this system has a high robustness. It's able to maintain the productivity. This one has a low robustness. It's not able to get back to where it was before. The vulnerability is the degree to which the ecosystem is sensitive to a perturbation. So if we have climate variability, hot temperatures, low temperatures, pest pressure, drought, any of those things, is the system able to withstand that? Any exposure, how sensitive is it? That indicates the vulnerability of the system. And all of these contribute to the resilience of the system. The resilience then is the ability to absorb a change or have a perturbation impact the system and adapt to it and improve the adaptive capacity of the system. So rather than going off wild and being very crazy in things, a resilient system is able to maintain stability, and robustness. So the environmental perturbations that we're very familiar with: rainfall, total precipitation, temperature, the max min, growing degree days, which we calculate these quite often. It's just the Tmax, Tmin divided by 2. Growing degree day models are used quite commonly to predict or model crop production. Some crops model it very well, such as corn. Other crops don't do so well. Soybeans is not great. It does a little bit, but it's not great at following growing degree days, but it is sensitive to Tmax and Tmin. Extreme degree days are another method of looking at extreme events that decrease crop production. We know under very hot temperatures, crop production is stalled, plant production is stalled, because the plants cannot deal with very hot temperatures. Extreme degree days are calculated similar to growing degree days, and then we accumulate the number of extreme degree days over the growing season. And I use a base of 86 for the extreme degree days. So they're calculated as the Tmax minus the T upper. So T upper in this case is the 86 degrees. So every time temperature goes above 86 degrees, that accumulates as an extreme degree day. And then another method is the number of days with extreme temperature, because you have not only the amount of excess temperature, but also the number of days. So these are all environmental perturbations that can be used to examine production potential in crops or performance. Now, one big thing I'm going to point out here: the previous measurements were all done statewide. It's difficult especially when you're looking at environmental factors, to look at a statewide scale. Kansas in particular has such a diversity across the state. So now I'm going to be looking at county level data.
Gretchen, I'm going to jump in for just one moment.
Yes.
For those, if you do have a question along the way, there is a Q&A function that will be at the bottom of your screen. So don't go to the chat. That's been disabled for participants. You can go to Q&A and type a question, or if you raise your hand, we'll be watching for that, and then we'll allow you to, we'll be able to unmute you so you can ask. So for those, if you're having questions along the way, those are the ways to ask.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, please go ahead and interrupt me, because I cannot see you, so I don't see the hand raises. Oops. Okay. So here are historical weather trends for Parsons. And I don't want to get into climate change stuff. I'm just showing you, here's the difference. Here's what happens. And again, data access is always a challenge. But since 1895 to 2023, there's been a slight trend in increasing precipitation, very slight. So there really has not been a change in precipitation. There's been a slight decrease in cumulative growing degree days, more of a decrease in cumulative and extreme degree days. So it's gotten a little bit cooler. Now, I need to talk to my climate friends, because I'm seeing a more of a wiggle in the data than just a linear trend, but that's overall, it's negative. It's getting cooler. Cumulative Tmax, the number of days more than 90, again, has decreased. If you look at the Tmax and Tmin, the maximum and minimum temperatures for the last 135 years, pretty steady. So that's not, changes in environmental parameters are not impacting the crop production. Something else is going on. One of the things that we're looking at is, and these are the individual counties, again, with pairing individual records of yield with county averages, which even for county averages, it's difficult to do. You know how much variability there is, but it's a little bit better. But we see a strong relationship with rainfall, not surprising. Again, lower rainfall means lower yields. That's not surprising. Higher temperatures higher cumulative and extreme degree days means lower production. So one of the things that we're seeing is a loss of crop genetic stability. The crops are more sensitive to temperature, especially high temperatures. Again, lower yields as temperature increases, and is more sensitive to rainfall, especially drought, lower yields as rainfall decreases. So the crop genetic background, the diversity of crop genetic background has decreased, leading to more instability of the yield. And one thing I was trying to find data about, but there are many fewer seed producers. There are very few companies that own the genetics that make up the major crops that we grow. So we have much less diversity in the crops. We've got lots of different cultivars we can plant, lots of different varieties to choose from, but they have a very common background. That particularly happened with the genetic revolution and putting the genome in it, but I'll come back to that later. Another huge thing I know we're all talking about is the lost soil. Cropland erosion rates. Wow, we've done so much better. We've gotten so much better at losing soil. We're still losing a lot of soil. This is, and I calculated this roughly based on rainfall. So when you get a lot of rainfall, you get more soil loss. When you have less rainfall, you have less soil loss. We had a big shift in how we managed the crop with moldboard plowing and so on, going down to more conservation-minded plowing. So we've done better at soil loss. The big thing to remember is that soil loss is cumulative. So you don't lose an inch of soil and grow it back in a year. Once that soil's gone, it's gone. And I estimate that we've lost, and this is, like I say, based in Parsons, we've lost about 10 inches of soil. That's a huge amount of soil, and that's not coming back. One of the challenges we have in eastern Kansas is the clay pan. So we've got good soil for about the top 10 to 12 inches, and then we get this huge clay content, huge increase in clay content, the clay pan, that really restricts growth. This is a texture triangle showing, and these are all from fields in Southeast Kansas. These are production fields in Southeast Kansas, that the sand, silt, and clay determines the texture of the soil. And you can see 0 to 3 inches, we've got nice silt loam. We move slowly up at 3 to 6 inches to silty clay. Get 6 to 12, we get silty clay to silty clay loam transition. By the time we're at 12 inches, we're into really heavy clay. This is for one particular field that I used. Several fields, this is not just one, but this one is the one I'm showing. We had 0 to 3 inches were in the clay, 3 to 6 inches were in the very heavy clay. So we've lost the productive topsoil, we've lost the silt loam, and we've exposed clay. And crops don't like heavy clay. Corn yield reduction with the soil as the soil clay content increases. Soybean yield loss with heavy clay. Wheat yield loss with heavy clay. So by losing the topsoil, we've lost our productivity, we've lost the capacity. Another thing to consider is most tillage is down at about 1 foot. So we've lost that top really good stuff. We're down deeper. The prairie was made to take full advantage of the whole soil profile. One thing I would love to be able to demonstrate is that tillage makes the clay pan. I don't know that the clay pan was there when the prairie was there. I think by the constant tillage at 1 foot, constant short production, because soybean roots don't go very deep when they're only grown for 6-7 months. Same with every single crop. When it's only grown for a short time, you don't establish all of these roots deep in the soil. You don't have the root passageways into that deep soil. And so
Gretchen,
yeah,
we do have a question.
yes,
Okay. It's from Candy.
yes.
So she said, hey, Gretchen, in that clay pan, is it more dense in the cropland versus well-managed grazing land? Meaning, do you see roots growing through it, or is it completely restricted?
I have not looked much at pasture. I really would like to. One thing that I have done, I did this work a while ago, actually when I first got here, 2013. I would really like to go back and look at this because I've now had some farmers that have converted to no-till, and it is so different. Their fields have healed so much that I really wonder. And this was one of the fields that, I mean, that's really heavy clay, and that's 12 inches. That's you can't hardly get a probe in there. And now we can get a probe in there down to 24 inches without thinking about it. So I think a lot of what's happening when you convert to more ecological approach, when you have a permanent cover, when you have cover crops, when you we stop tilling, the roots form in this lower part of the profile, and the plant is able to take up more nutrients lower in the profile. There has been some work done on pasture looking at, I'm not going to remember the name, gamma grass, that it is able to go deeper in the profile. I think most pasture plants, because they're there longer, they are much more able to incorporate and work within the whole soil profile. Basically, our crop production is basically a foot deep. That's all it's going. It's silly. We're losing all of this potential deeper in the soil profile. Pastures, I think, correct or are able to take into effect. And I'm not talking about Flint Hills. Of course, you've got rock underneath. That's a real different story. The clay pan soil is just heavy clay. I think what happens when you have a permanent root in there, you get more organic matter. And so you're not going to change your clay percent. You're not going to suddenly make it silt loam, but you're going to have a lot more, the clay is going to be a lot more broken up, and you're going to be able to use it more. I hope that answers your question. Candy, you know more about this than I do. So does she have something she'd like to say?
If you do, Candy, I just gave you the function to speak, so you can unmute and talk.
Is she writing in the chat or question Q&A? I'm sorry, I don't think I really answered your question because I haven't measured pasture much.
No problem. I'm looking with that, but we did also have another comment from Bryce Custer, who's one of our board members with Kansas Soil Health Alliance, said he would be interested in seeing a PFLA above and below the clay pan.
And I have got some of the, actually, well, here we go. Let's just go there. So let me go ahead and I will get to that in a minute, but let me, because I've got some of that. Transformation. During the transformation period, this time of rapid growth, rapid investment in chemicals, pesticides, and then we've got the genetic thing. We've caused a lot of resistance in pests, and we've lost a lot of diversity in non-target populations. One of the things that's really critical that we tend to forget is how alive the soil is, and the interaction with the plants in the soil is quite profound. The type of soil microbes that you have are dependent on the plants that you have. And I've got some measurements of this. Changing between one wheat cultivar and another wheat cultivar, just changing varieties, will change the microbial composition in the soil. Plants put out carbohydrates mostly that the microbes take up and utilize. Microbes put things into the soil that plants take up and use. Very much a symbiotic process. When you lose plant diversity, you lose soil microbe diversity. And some of the soil, we've got lots of soil bacteria that are very beneficial, nitrogen fixing, denitrifying, nitrifying bacteria, actinomycetes. The soil fungi are also, we've got some beneficial fungi. We've also got some pathogenic and parasitic fungi. Again, when you change the plant production, you change that. These are, here we go, PLFA biomass changes drastically between tilled and no tilled. This is for a Parsons silt, no, yeah, Parsons silt loam, I think. And this is out of Parsons, but other folks have shown the same thing too. Much less diversity, much less number in microbial components in the soil when you go from no till to till. Okay, here we get microbial biomass, and these all were done by my student, Jerry. Vertical changes in soil microbial properties, published in 2018. He's got all this. This was the clay pan layer was about 12 to 16 inches, so that's where you need to look. We have a conventional tilled crop production field, a no-till crop production field, and then a long-term hay meadow, and it was gamma grass. Big differences in what's going on in the microbial populations with depth. These are some enzymes, and again, I mentioned the linkages between enzymes that some of them, the microbes release and some of them plants release. There's a lot of stuff going on in the soil. This is beta-D-glucosidase, which decomposes carbon. You see an interesting buildup or increase in the clay pan under the gamma grass field with the acid phosphatase, which breaks down and accesses phosphorus. You see again an increase in the hay meadow, slight increase in the no-till situation. Huge increase in N-acetylglucosamine, which is used to access nitrogen. So you get a big buildup below the clay pan in that case. So roots are there, they're doing stuff there. Does this answer your question, Bryce, or did you want to see more or talk more about it? Biggest thing, I could send you that publication. It's got all those things in it, but we've seen some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I was kind of curious what your fungal to bacteria ratio is below that clay pan. Guess it's
Okay.
bacteria dominant.
Okay, I think we should have that, but I'm not sure. It will probably be in that publication.
And I'm sure it's bacteria dominant even in your top layer above it. It'd be interesting how deep you can get that, bacteria to fungus ratio where you have it at, even at, 3-4 foot deep.
Right. And when you convert to no-till, most of the changes happen in the very, very top. But they have done, Jerry did some work with Chuck Rice on a long-term, I think it was a 50-year study they have up in Manhattan. And the changes that are going on there, that carbon sequestration, and it just continues. It just keeps chugging along. So I think what we don't know about soils is phenomenal. Just our depth of ignorance for soils is just really, there's a lot of stuff we don't know, we don't appreciate of what it does. And I think these prairie soils are just phenomenal in what we had and just literally plowed through in very short order. So, okay. Oops, okay. So that's the overview, fairly quick overview of the changes that have happened in Kansas. In looking forward, we are not going to get 10 inches of soil back. It's not going to happen. We've lost a lot of crop genetic stability because of the genetic or the gene revolution, where we moved to these genes that are the crops that now have a much smaller, they're no longer conventional, they're all genetically modified. We have many, many varieties, but less background in the crops. We need to look at how to improve the crop genetic stability. The loss of soil resilience, the lost soil has severely impaired the resilience of the soil. We've also lost the diversity in the soil biome, and we need to improve that with really different crops, really different cover crops, really different crops. You put a brassica in a cropping system and it changes drastically. Brassicas are really cool in what they put out, what they can do. We've looked at it a lot with incorporating a brassica to control disease, and that's showing some promise. But we really need to look at the whole ecosystem, because the loss of diversity in the soil microbiome is really impairing our resilience, the resilience of the system. And because of that lost resilience in the soil, we've got increased vulnerability, resilience in the soil and the genetic stability of the crop. We've got increased vulnerability to temperature and drought. Always, I mean, this is where it's at. Always the 5 principle: keep it covered, minimize soil disturbance, increase diversity, continual living plant root, incorporate livestock. This is like the bare minimum of where we need to be at. The challenges that we have, we've already lost those 10 inches of soil. They're not coming back. We no longer have the luxury of incremental improvements. We need a transformative approach to really address the ecosystem. And I am not the first person to say agriculture should incorporate ecological principles. That is absolutely essential now. Failure to support the entire ecosystem has impaired the resilience of the crop production system. I hate to be doom and gloom, but we've got to do something really different. Diversity improves the stability and resilience of the agro-ecosystem. And I know that, I guess I don't want to get political, but anyway, I wish I could leave you on a really good note. It's not. We've got our work cut out for us. We have to do something drastically different. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. I'm going to stop sharing now, right? And then we can see each other and take questions.
I think that sounds great. What I'm going to go through is, Bryce, I see your hand up. I'm going to mark each of our participants here where I'm enabling the feature if you'd like to talk, versus typing your questions in. So that way we can have that dialogue. So Bryce, your hand's up. If you have another question, go for it. And then, well, we have one from Candy as well. I might start with that. Her mic is not working for her to unmute, or is it now, Candy?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay. I'll just read what I asked here.
Perfect.
Gretchen, when you was doing all of this research for this presentation, did you ever come across some historical organic matter levels for Kansas? That's one I get asked a lot. And the best thing I could find was from Southwest Kansas. It was like back in the 1800s. I can find it and send it to you. It was really old. The paper was scanned and it was yellow. That said 6%. Have you seen anything different from that? Because down where you're at, you got a lot more potential for biomass.
Right. I have not. I have seen, once they switched to no-till, I have seen regularly 4%. So I think 6% is a little bit low. but for Southwest, that might be fine. I have always wanted to do side-by-side comparison of fence row versus field, because I think that would give us some estimate. I mean, the fence row is not undisturbed, but it's as close as we get. You know, because yeah, I think that would be very interesting. So I have not, the thing that was really interesting with this study with Chuck Rice and Jerry did up in Manhattan, there, with the whole point they're looking at is carbon stabilization in the soil. The whole point to do the carbon markets. That's what the focus of it was. What they're finding, and there's lots and lots of arguments about this, but their finding is it doesn't saturate. It just keeps going, and it gets deeper and deeper, that the carbon will transfer to the next layer down. So as far as a carbon sink, it looks like the soil may have an infinite potential to keep collecting more and more carbon. It's not soil organic matter, but it's carbon. But I thought that was really interesting. Like I say, when you initially transition, you see a lot of changes in the very, very top, and it takes a lot longer for those changes to get down in the field. I'm sorry, that's me. Get further down. So I think, again, like I say, I would love to see native prairie and go back and measure some of these things with depth. I don't know if there is opportunities left that somebody really has intact native prairie that we could take some measurements, because I think that would be fascinating. What was really going on with these very dense root systems. So, but I have not found that. Okay,
Bryce, I see your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yeah. First off, thank you, Gretchen, for doing this. We really appreciate the work you've done on it. Second one is when you're talking about the cover crops, when you have a suggestion or comment about if you had a producer that's always been in a monocrop system, there's a lot of controversy whether you need to plant a good 3-way species or 4-way species that will work well and is economically viable to do versus a 20-way or 30-way mix that might not be quite as economically stable for a producer to put in. And I just thought maybe you'd comment on what you think of that.
The biggest thing is do something that's going to work for them, because you don't want to say, oh yeah, you need a 25 gallon and it's 25 species mix and it's so expensive, and they do it once and quit. So I think the first thing is do what they're going to continue doing. Okay. If that means they plant rye instead of the same old, then plant rye. And that's it's easy to grow. You can actually sell the seed if you want. You can do other things with it if you want. Another one, like I say, if you put pretty much any brassica in the system, brassica has a very different composition than other plants, than our regular grasses and so on. And so if you do a rye turnip mix, turnips are really cheap. Rye is pretty cheap for the seed. Oats are really cheap for the seed. So do an oat turnip mix. Really not a huge stretch of, you got to figure out how something different works. But start simple and add, and so that they have an initial good success and then can move to something else. There are a lot of turnip cousins that are good. Of course, rape and what's the other, tillage radish, all those. They're 2 to 3 times the price of turnips. So again, there's challenges in doing a mix like turnip oat, very different seed size. So you got to figure out things. So that's the biggest thing that I would suggest doing. The other thing too, when you talk about monocrop, I consider corn, beans, wheat a monocrop. There's 3 different crops in there. but when you repeat corn, wheat, beans, corn, wheat, beans, you haven't really done something different. If you've gone to no-till, fantastic. That's great. I really appreciate that. But we do need to get out of the corn, beans, wheat. One thing they could do is sorghum too, which sorghum is a booger. They don't like sorghum, and I understand why. But in replacement of corn, because one of the other big problems they have is what cash crop are you going to take out to replace with cover crop? And that's where the livestock, incorporating livestock, can really help with that. So if you put in oat turnip, you could turn cattle out and graze it. Then you're recuperating a little bit of money on your cover crop. Does that make sense? So I would really
Yes.
not, yeah, I would not support a 25. Follow the money. The guys that are making money off of the 25 cultivar mixes are the seed dealers. So
Agreed.
the other thing too is we've done some work that you put out those multi 12 or more species mix. Most of them don't come up anyway. Austrian winter peas, my gosh, they were pushing that big time, and we just wouldn't get any germination. And it's Austrian winter peas, really expensive. It's a booger to plant because it's a completely different size seed. So a lot of that's practicality. Okay, Lynn?
Hi. Thank you so much. I appreciate your perspective today. It's been really good.
Thanks.
If we wanted to replicate the way that you presented the rainfall information to other areas of the state, because we are so diverse in our rainfall,
Yes.
are there other people like you in other areas of the state to work with? Or do you have
Lord.
recommendations of data sets that we look at? What would be our best practice here?
Lord help us if there's somebody else like me. What I can do is, where are you at?
So I'm up in extreme northeast,
Okay.
but I've looked at rainfall across the state, and I think a lot of our soil health practices, or the way we recommend cover cropping practices, would be delineated based on rainfall. So I think there's kind of at least 3 zones across the state of Kansas we need to be looking at.
Yes.
And I think it'd be good to have that same information replicated for each of those zones.
Yeah. It's funny that you said that, because I love playing with numbers. So I had a lot of fun doing this. I wasn't very thrilled when I got to the end and saw what was going on. It's like, this is not good. But what I can do is I can show you what I did. So we can set up a Zoom meeting and I'll show you what I did and share my files with you. And
Okay.
yeah, that would be the easiest to do. Then you can download the data and do whatever you want to do. Because the other big thing that I'd really like to do is tap into variety trials, because then I've got station data and variety trials that exactly are very, very close to each other. Even doing a county average is very, very uncertain, because there's so much diversity even across the county. But yeah, send me a note. You should have my email. Send me a note and we'll set up a Zoom time and I'll show you what I did.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure. And yeah, I was really thinking about doing, okay, I need to do this moving further west, because my gosh, it changes so much across the state.
I agree. That is very true. And one of our unique aspects to Kansas is that variability and that difference, and why it's important to have good people spread throughout the state who can, the principles stay the same, but that context does matter quite a bit. But This was really great. I'm looking, I don't see any more hands up or any more questions, and we're coming pretty close to the top of the hour. So out of respect of any of those who are on a lunch hour, I think we'll get close to wrapping it up. Gretchen had put her information in the slide here. You might pop that back up real quick if
I
you
was
can
trying to
find it.
figure out, if I put it in the question and answer or put it in the chat, folks can get.
I'm not even sure. Let's do question and answer. Are you able to access the question and answer?
Yes, but I can't
Okay.
figure out. I'm going to type an answer to Candy's question
Okay.
because it's the last one there.
And I believe for those who registered, my information's out there. If you are not sure on things, if you go to the Kansas Soil Health Alliance's website, if you fill the form out on there, contact us. It'll come to me, so I can help provide, and I'll make any connections that are needed following this if you're not able to locate.
Yeah, it's not real tough. It's Sassenrath at ksu.edu. So yeah, or you can look me up. I think I'm pretty much the only Gretchen in Southeast Kansas.
That will make it easy. So
Yeah.
I again really want to thank you for putting this together. I want to thank everyone who took the time to join us. If you enjoyed the presentation, we will be, as I mentioned at the outside of this, putting the recording up and sharing it on Kansas Soil Health Alliance's channels. So feel free to share it with others who you think would have enjoyed it and just weren't able to make it. I'm going to turn it over one last time to Joanna to let us know what's coming up for March.
Yes, so join us in March when we will hear from Marlon Winger, who is a regional soil health specialist with USDA NRCS. He will be talking about a new program that is coming out, SEMA 204 Adaptive Management for Soil Health Program. It'll talk about on-farm trials and different conservation practices in that program. And then also, if you would like to see some other soil health events, you can visit our website.
That's wonderful. Thanks for highlighting that. Again, thank you everyone for attending. Be on the lookout for the recording of the webinar if you want to go back and review anything or have follow-up questions or anything to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it and enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you.